What's up YouTube? My name is Zach with Android Digest, and today we're going to be talking about the OnePlus Nord. Now when you think of OnePlus, if you're anything like me, you think of the golden ages, the great days where OnePlus would make these great flagship killer phones. OnePlus became known for making phones around $500, and these phones were competing with those great flagships that were $700, $800, $900. But recently, we're seeing OnePlus has stepped up their game, and they've started to make smartphones that cost more, but also perform a little bit better. But if you're anything like me, you are tired of paying $1,000 for a smartphone. The OnePlus Nord is a smartphone that's trying to compete with those high-end smartphones, but it's a phone that comes in at a very reasonable price. So is the OnePlus Nord worth buying? Is this the flagship killing phone we've been waiting for? Let's find out right now. Alright, so I've got the OnePlus Nord here in my hand, and the first thing I want to talk about in this review is availability. The OnePlus Nord is not currently available in the US, it's actually available in Europe and India. But that does not mean that it won't work in the US. In fact, this phone will work pretty good with T-Mobile and AT&T. Just keep in mind that this phone was designed for overseas use, so if you do use it in the US, you might have slightly worse signal depending on where you're at. So your mileage may vary depending on where you live, what carrier you have, and what bands your towers work with. So if you have 2 or 3 towers in your area and they work with certain bands, you want to make sure that this phone supports those bands. But AT&T and T-Mobile use similar technology to companies overseas. So when you're looking to use the OnePlus Nord in the US, you're going to have better luck using it on T-Mobile or AT&T. Now Europe has 2 models. One model has 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of storage. Now the retail price for that is £380. Now that's going to leave you just under $500 in US dollars. Now you can also bump up and go to the next model up, which has 12 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, and that's the model I'm reviewing today. You can get that model for about £449. So OnePlus is really trying to undercut those flagships and give you a flagship level phone with great quality for this price that's right around $500 US dollars. But did they deliver? Let's start off by looking at what comes in the box. Now, good news for you, this phone comes with a 30-watt fast charger. So even though this phone doesn't have wireless charging, coming with a 30-watt fast charger is pretty awesome. Now if you take a close look at this phone, you need to realize that this phone, it feels and looks premium. This phone has a very premium design. And if you look at the front of the phone, you're going to notice a really nice modern look with the little hole punch up there. And it's got 2 cameras, which is why the hole punch is a little bit bigger. You're going to see 2 cameras in the front. You're going to see 4 cameras in the back, but you're going to see very small bezels, which is a very big plus. Now, if we take a look at the bottom of the phone, you're going to see a USB-C port. You're going to see a SIM card slot. Now, this phone can take 2 SIM cards, which is huge. If you love to have 2 SIM cards active for business, and you want one for business, you want one for personal use, you could have both phones active or both SIM cards active in this phone. So that is a really big plus. Now you have 1 speaker down here. It doesn't have 2 speakers, it's just 1, but it does get pretty loud. Now if you go to the right side of the phone, you do have the power button. You do have this as well. Now this is pretty cool. This is a slider for your phone as far as vibrating, as far as ringing, as far as silencing it. This slider helps determine if your phone rings or not. So if you slide this all the way down, your ringer will be on. If you slide it up 1, it'll be on vibrate. If you slide it up another notch, it will be on silent. So that is pretty darn cool that you could just slide this up and down and you don't have to mess with your volume all the time. So it's pretty cool that if you have an active lifestyle, maybe you are a person that uses this dual SIM card slot, you could silence your phone very easily and go from business to personal life really quick so you could just get a breath and relax. So I really like this button, and I wish more manufacturers would use something like this. Now there's nothing much to see on the top of the phone, and on the left side of the phone you just have the volume up and the volume down, but this is a really premium design. It feels nice in the hand, it feels light. And this phone, one thing that is amazing about this phone, it is the display. This phone has a 6.44 inch display. It is a 2440 by 1080 resolution in it, and the aspect ratio is 20:9. Now that is not all that is great about this display. This has a 90 Hz refresh rate, and for the price, that is absolutely incredible. I've said it a lot. I know Marquise Brownlee has said it a lot. A lot of tech reviewers say it, that when you go to a 90 Hz screen or you go to a 120 Hz screen, it's hard to go back to those 60 Hz screens. So the display in this phone is absolutely phenomenal, and the refresh rate makes it so much smoother. When you add that to this great resolution, this phone, it just looks awesome. This phone also has very good brightness. So when you compare this phone to other phones in the price range, I think you're gonna find that this display, it stacks up very well. In fact, around $500, I just don't see a lot of high refresh rate screens, and not high refresh rate screens that look like this. Another thing that this phone does well is performance. Now, I know you might have heard of the Snapdragon 765G, and a lot of people call it a mid-range chip that's not that good. But they need to realize that not all of us buy $1,000 smartphones. The Snapdragon 765G performs way better than people say. And if you care about benchmarks, no. This phone does not have the best benchmarks out of every phone that exists. But normal people don't care about benchmarks. You just want to know how is day-to-day performance. And the bottom line is I didn't have any stutters. I didn't have any lag with this phone. This phone performed absolutely great. And when you have a 90 Hz screen, it seems like it's performing even better because everything is very smooth as you're scrolling. I would open up multiple apps. I would go through them. I would go in between all these apps. I didn't have any stutters. I didn't have hiccups. Everything was very, very smooth as I'm scrolling through the news. Things were very smooth as I was watching videos. Things were smooth. I even played some games. I got into some gaming, and you know what? Things were great. I played some Madden. I played some Mario Kart. I did not have any issues with this phone with performance. Your average person does not need a $1,000 smartphone anymore. You need a phone that doesn't stutter, that doesn't hiccup, and does what you need it to do, and this phone is that. That's why this phone is so good for around that $500 price mark, because you have a phone that has great performance. You have a phone that has a great display, and those are two big things that normal consumers care about. Now, one thing that is very important to people is camera performance. And you need to know that this phone has a pretty good camera. It's not flagship level. It's not quite as good as the performance or the display in my mind, but it's still a pretty good camera. And if you are a camera enthusiast, you need to know that this phone has 6 different cameras. Now on the front of the phone, you have a wide angle selfie cam, and that's a 32 megapixel camera. And you also have an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, and that is for those selfies where you want to fit some extra people in. Now if you're in that selfie mode and you click the little button that shows extra people, that is for you to take a selfie where you can get more people in the picture. And as you can see with that picture, I took it alone because I don't really have friends. Now when we get to these rear cameras, the main camera is pretty good, and I would put it below flagship level, below those $1,000 phones, but we have to remember this is not a $1,000 phone. This is a great value phone, and I think the camera fits the price point pretty well. Now if I have any advice for OnePlus or anything I'd recommend, I would recommend spending a little more money on the main camera, and I would really get rid of some of those extra cameras. And I don't think a lot of people are going to use the macro camera, for example. But honestly, when I took shots of my daughter, I took shots of my family, I thought the camera did pretty darn well. Now this camera won't be as good as phones like the Note 20 Ultra. It might not be as good as $1,000 smartphones, but this phone still has a pretty good camera for most people. So how's the battery life in this phone? Does this phone have a good battery life? I would absolutely say yes. Even if you have a 90 Hz display in your phone, when you have a battery this size, you're going to get pretty good battery life, and I was pretty impressed overall. I would get around 6 hours of screen time on my phone. You might get a little more, you might get a little less, but this should get your power users through the day. It should get your moderate users through the day with a little bit of battery to spare. So I think most users are going to be pretty impressed by this battery. And yeah, it's pretty darn good. So now let's talk about the extra features of this phone. And one of the great features of the OnePlus Nord is 5G capability. That means that the OnePlus Nord does indeed work with 5G. Now, every carrier uses different 5G technology, and every phone might as well. You know, Verizon uses different technology, for example, than T-Mobile or AT&T. And if you have an international carrier, of course, your carrier may use different technology than we use here in the States. So whatever carrier you have, you want to make sure to research that your phone and your carrier both have the same 5G capability. But it's still exciting to see 5G come to an unlocked phone like this. That's a very exciting thing because we don't often see it, especially at this $500 price range. You might have noticed we didn't talk about the fingerprint sensor, and that is because this phone has a in-screen fingerprint sensor, and it's really good, it's really fast, and I really like it, and it's pretty much that simple. When I was working with the Motorola Edge, the sensor was a little bit slow. So this fingerprint sensor is very fast, and I very much enjoy that. Now it only has one speaker, which is a bummer. So if you just want to make sure you could hear things and you want to make sure it's loud, this definitely does that. It's a pretty loud speaker. It's not the highlight of this phone, but when you have a $500 phone, you got to take some shortcuts, and it does only have one speaker. Now some other things you need to be aware of: this phone does not have wireless charging, and this phone does not have water resistance. So that means if you need a water-resistant phone, this might not be the phone for you, and if you need wireless charging, this might not be the phone for you either. But this phone does use 30-watt fast charging, which is amazing to see. It's awesome that they included that in the box. So if you are getting low, those wireless chargers, they take a long time anyway. So your practical users, you probably just want to plug it in anyway, so that's an okay compromise for most people. Now one last con to this phone, it's a really minor thing, but I think this is important to get the feedback out there, is that this phone, you cannot adjust the gesture sensitivity. So with Android 10 gestures, and I know Android 11 is coming soon, you do have nice gestures where you can go back. Well, you have to get pretty darn close to the left side of the phone to go back. You might like that, but if you're someone who's used to swiping a little bit further to the right, maybe you want the sensitivity adjusted, you cannot adjust the gesture sensitivity on this phone. So that's something I'm hoping OnePlus could address in a software update. Alright, so let's summarize the review. This phone has a great display. It has great performance, and those are two huge things that people want in a phone. This phone is at a great price and a great value as well. It has a good camera, maybe not the best, maybe not flagship level, but it's still close, and it comes with a lot of extra cameras so you can take a lot of different shots from different angles. The battery is also really good, which is also a big plus, but when you make a $500 phone or just under $500, you have to make some compromises, and OnePlus did decide to have no wireless charging. They have one speaker on the bottom, they don't have two speakers, and there is no water resistance, which sort of stinks. So, should your average person buy this phone? I've got to say, there are not a lot of phones I would wholeheartedly recommend. And every time I give a recommendation, I normally say it depends. You know, I'm not paid for this review whatsoever by OnePlus, but I'm going to keep it real with you, right? Just like I did with some highs and lows of this phone. But your average person is absolutely going to love this phone. Yes, if water resistance is a big deal to you, if it is a big deal to have the absolute latest and greatest processor, sure, you might want to get a $1,000 phone. You might want to get the Note 20 Ultra. But your average person just wants really good performance. Your average person doesn't care about benchmarks. You just don't want your phone to have hiccups or lag. And especially nowadays, your average person loves that 90 Hz refresh rate. A 90 Hz phone is just so smooth. So this phone has a great display. Things look good. It has great performance. And it still has a good camera that is still pretty good for most people. So I think most people should wholeheartedly buy this phone. But if you are in the US, you have to keep in mind that this phone may not work with your carrier. There are some bands that are missing from this phone, so this might not communicate well with the towers in your area. It depends on your carrier and your area. But if you do your research, if you know this phone will work well in your area, I wholeheartedly recommend it to pretty much anyone. As long as those cons I mentioned aren't big drawbacks, as long as those things are not cons that really throw you away from this phone, I would recommend this phone as one of the top phones of 2020, and I am not exaggerating. OnePlus is also pretty good about updating their phones anyway. It's got a nice vanilla Android for the software. So OnePlus is doing really good with this phone. This is a great flagship killer for sure. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're in Europe, especially if you're in India, and if you're looking at that price point, right, between 380 and 500 pounds. Well, this phone, it really fits that niche, and I think this is going to be one of the best phones you're going to find for that price. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. Feel free to check the link in the description where you could purchase this phone. That is a really great thing. I'm going to have the Europe link in the description. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter. I am new to Twitter. I really need some Twitter followers because I've really been pushing hard on my YouTube channel, but I really want my Twitter, well, I want my Twitter to explode, okay? So please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and click that bell to get those notifications, which would be great. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day, and be safe.